Welcome to a discussion of Li Young Lee's poem, Persimmons. Some of you probably know what a persimmon is. It's a fruit, and it might be yellow-orange, kind of on the outside, maybe even a dark red-orange. It can be as wide as 4 inches in diameter, though they have real small ones. It's often kind of spherical shaped, but it can also be acorn or pumpkin shaped. And when persimmons are ripe, they have a thick kind of pulpy jelly inside them, and the skin is pretty thin. The shell is kind of thin, made of a thin skin, kind of waxy. This is the poem Persimmons by Li Young Lee. Li Young Lee is Asian. His father, in fact, was born in China, came to the United States, and was a Presbyterian minister. Though this poem doesn't discuss it, it was very, very dangerous, rough transit out of Asia and over to the United States. Li Young Lee sees his father in many of his poems as a kind of powerful, knowledgeable teacher. In some poems, it's difficult for him to individuate away from the father. In this poem, we find that the father is a model for how to pay attention to the world. I would say, in fact, the poem is about how we learn things, how we know. The study of the way we gain knowledge is usually called ontology. So the poem's about ontology. It's also, I think, fair to say, about the immigrant experience. What is it to know one language, have to learn a new language, and fail to grasp all the nuances of the new language? Persimmons. In 6th grade, Mrs. Walker slapped the back of my head and made me stand in the corner for not knowing the difference between persimmon and precision. How to choose persimmons. This is precision. Ripe ones are soft and brown spotted. Sniff the bottoms. The sweet one will be fragrant. How to eat. Put the knife away. Lay down newspaper. Peel the skin tenderly, not to tear the meat. Chew the skin. Suck it and swallow. Now eat the meat of the fruit. So sweet. All of it to the heart. Donna undresses. Her stomach is white. In the yard, dewy and shivering with crickets, we lie naked, face up, face down. I teach her Chinese. Crickets. Choo-choo. Do. I've forgotten. Naked. I've forgotten. Ni wo. You and me. I part her legs, remember to tell her she is beautiful as the moon. Other words that got me into trouble were fight and fright, wren and yarn. Fight was what I did when I was frightened. Fright was what I felt when I was fighting. Wrens are small, plain birds. Yarn is what one knits with. Wrens are soft as yarn. My mother made birds out of yarn. I loved to watch her tie the stuff. A bird, a rabbit, a wee man. Mrs. Walker brought a persimmon to class and cut it up so everyone could taste a Chinese apple. Knowing it wasn't ripe or sweet, I didn't eat, but I watched the other faces. My mother said, every persimmon has a sun inside, something golden, glowing, warm as my face. Once, in the cellar, I found 2 wrapped in newspaper, forgotten and not yet ripe. I took them and set both on my bedroom windowsill, where each morning a cardinal sang, "The sun, the sun." Finally, understanding he was going blind, my father sat up all one night, waiting for a song, a ghost. I gave him the persimmons, swelled, heavy as sadness and sweet as love. This year, in the muddy lighting of my parents' cellar, I rummage, looking for something I lost. My father sits on the tired wooden stairs, black cane between his knees, hand over hand, gripping the handle. He's so happy that I've come home. I ask how his eyes are. A stupid question. All gone, he answers. Under some blankets, I find a box. Inside the box, I find 3 scrolls. I sit beside him and untie 3 paintings by my father. Hibiscus leaf and a white flower. 2 cats preening. 2 persimmons, so full they want to drop from the cloth. He raises both his hands to touch the cloth, asks, "Which is this?" "This is persimmons, Father." Oh, the feel of the wolf tail on the silk, the strength, the tense precision in the wrist. I painted them hundreds of times, eyes closed. These I painted blind. Some things never leave a person. Scent of the hair of one you love. The texture of persimmons in your palm. The ripe weight. So, this is a beautiful and very famous poem by Lee Young Lee, and let's just talk about it in terms of what's going on in the poem. We start out in the 6th grade, and in fact what you're going to notice with this poem is how often time shifts. We start out in the 6th grade when Mrs. Walker, who was his teacher, actually slaps the back of his head and makes him go stand in the corner, the speaker, because he doesn't know the difference between the word persimmon and the word precision. Not sure how good a teacher Mrs. Walker was, but let's move on. Then he shifts out of that scene into a meditation or a reflection on how to choose persimmons. To choose a persimmon, he says, requires precision. And he tells you that the right ones are soft and brown spotted and that you need to smell the bottom of them. He said, the more fragrant it is, the sweeter it will be. And he tells us how to eat the precision. Excuse me. He tells us how to eat the persimmon. I think Mrs. Walker just smacked me in the back of the head. And then he says, now eat the meat of the fruit, so sweet, all of it, to the heart. So you're supposed to eat right down to the heart. And what's the next thing we have? The word heart suggests something important. And it helps us follow the transition to this person he loves, to Donna, probably his wife. Helps transition, in fact, to sexual love. Donna undresses, he tells us her stomach is white. We have now shifted in time to what might be the present. It's certainly no longer the 6th grade. And in this moment, this intimacy, he is trying to teach her Chinese. And he's forgotten some of his own language. So at this point, we understand that language makes us who we are, how we understand the world, and in fact, can influence how we love. The poem at this point almost asks us, how do we express ourselves intimately? And I think that's an important question to consider. How do we express ourselves to those we love? Not just to those with whom we are in love, but to those we love, friends and family, etc. Then he tells us that there are other words that got him into trouble, like fight and fright and ren and yarn. And he describes how his mother can embroider images, that she was artistic in her own way. Then he shifts back into the past, and Mrs. Walker, back in that 6th grade, brings a persimmon to class. And she tells everybody it's called a Chinese apple. Now this is ironic, since Mrs. Walker doesn't know what the speaker knows, which is that the persimmon, sometimes in the U.S. called a Chinese apple, sometimes, the persimmon itself is not ripe. The speaker knows this, but Mrs. Walker doesn't know this. And Mrs. Walker cuts up the persimmon for the children and asks them to eat it, but he knows not to because it's not ready to be eaten. He has a cultural advantage over Mrs. Walker and the other students. Previously, he had a cultural disadvantage because he didn't know the difference between these words that sounded so alike. Then he shifts to the metaphor of sun. Mother said, every persimmon has a sun inside, something golden, glowing, warm as my face. So this notion here is that the sun itself, which is a life-giving force, exists, at least mythologically, for the mother within the persimmon. And the child, the speaker who was a child, could believe that. Then we are here in the plot that the child, now grown perhaps, found 2 persimmon wrapped in a newspaper and gives them to his father, who was going blind. Then, right now, in the present moment, he tells us this year, he is in his parents' cellar, rummaging around. He'd lost something. He doesn't tell us what. Perhaps that loss has to do with the loss of his own language, the loss of a way of being. He's already told us that he can't remember all the words that he used to know. And his father and he speak. Turns out he finds 3 paintings that his father had done. And what is the last painting? That of 2 persimmons. Perhaps the persimmons that earlier the speaker had given his father when he was going blind. He raises both hands to touch the cloth, asks, which is this? The father raises both of his hands, as if being able to touch the cloth, he can sense what he knew when he was painting. And then the last 2 stanzas are in italics. And in fact, the first stanza is only 1 line. This is Persimmon's father. The speaker says that, and then what happens? The father speaks the last stanza. Oh, the feel of the wolf tail on the silk, the strength, the tense precision in the wrist. I painted them hundreds of times, eyes closed. These I painted blind. Some things never leave a person. Scent of the hair of one you love, the texture of persimmons in your palm, the ripe weight. Let's pause, step out of the theme for a second, and just think about some of the forms that Li Young Lee applies here. It's not a rhyming formal poem with iambic pentameter. It is not a received form, which is to say, it's not the kind of poem that has a predetermined structure and rhyme scheme and cadence or any of that. However, it does have many interesting techniques, one of which is, as I I've already talked about, is the shifts in time. And we've talked about how the poem moves around in order to place us in the speaker's childhood, later in the speaker's life, and finally with the father at the end of the poem. The poem gains a great deal of beauty, and I would say it renders the lush experience of knowing something intimately. Maybe language, maybe art, maybe painting, maybe the world, maybe another person. It renders that sensation with a lot of interior rhyme. If you go to the second stanza, this is precision. Right ones are soft and brown, spotted, sniff the bottoms. So you see spotted and bottoms, the OTTs. Then go down another line to the fourth line of that stanza. How to eat. Hear that sound, eat. Put the knife away, lay down newspaper. Peel the skin tenderly, not to tear the meat. Chew the skin, suck it and swallow. Now eat the meat of the fruit. So sweet, all of it. So we have eat, and then we have peel, we have the E sound, meat, right? Then eat and meat and sweet again. And in fact, even in the third line, we have the word sweet. There is a density of sound which suggests a kind of almost visceral lushness of a life that is well attended to. If you go further down to the next stanza, look at the A's in the third and fourth line. We lie naked, face up, face down. Right? Go down to the fourth stanza. Other words that got me in trouble were fight and fright, wren and yarn. Now look at these fourth and fifth lines of that stanza. Fight was what I did when I was frightened. So you hear the I sound. Fright was what I felt when I was fighting. So you can hear the I sounds again. Now, not only do we get a kind of the experience of the life well lived, the experience of the life carefully observed and felt, but we also recognize that words themselves are differentiated by only the slightest letters and the slightest sounds. Words are vocables, which is, if you separate meaning from a word, the vocable is the sound of that word. And vocables can sound very much alike and can cause confusion. One of the things the poem is suggesting is that we must pay attention to the world and we must pay attention to language. All right. I think if you go back to that the end of the second stanza, you'll notice that the word heart is there, and I said it connects us to Donna. So in effect, the heart is a symbol of love for his wife. But then what is the fruit? The fruit is linked as a symbol of love of the father, too. So the father is the teacher, and we are linked to the father by language, by love, and by the making of art itself, which is the father's paintings. At the end, the father, who is blind, knows which of his own paintings he holds. He can evoke how he painted while he was blind. So what does the father model for the speaker? He models a way of being calm and attentive to the world, a way of carefully observing the world and taking the world into the self, transforming it as art, as expression. Effectively, the father, even though he's blind, has a kind of calm understanding that the son has to learn. So the poem is about learning, it's about anthology, it's about the immigrant experience. It demonstrates how it's difficult to transition between cultures, that's for sure. It's about the way we can try to retain a sense of ourselves when reality shifts, when we go from one culture to another, one language to another. How do we retain a sense of ourselves. Not only should we try to remember our history, that is, in this case, our language, what we know about things in our history, in this case, what we know about persimmons. But I think it's also suggesting that if we pay attention to the things of the world, we can be present in the world. And if we are calm and present in the world, we will feel more secure. We will live life more fully, and we will be able, all of us, to adjust to changing circumstances, which will happen to us no matter what. Circumstances will change. This poem is not simply for people who have to transition between cultures. It's for all of us because it suggests a way to become secure in the way we face the world, and it shows us how we can adjust to the situations that consistently are in flux around us. It's really quite beautiful. And that's Persimmons by Lee Young Lee.